Joining today. Today we're going to be discussing security mainly. We're going to talk about a lot of different features, and the goal is really to give you some action items that you can take away from this presentation and act on right away. So we're going to go through a lot of different features that are available, and we're going to actually talk about some that are available to all SKUs, and then some that are available only to enterprise. So I'll try to be very clear about which ones those are, and of course there'll be a question period at the end to ensure that all of your questions are met. So let's start with just looking at the agenda and seeing how we're going to break out the discussion today. So we're going to look at some field insights, and I'm going to basically show you some information on recent breaches. And we're going to look at things like phishing metrics. And from those details, we're going to see what we can learn from those metrics and understand how we can properly protect ourselves within G Suite and take advantage of all the features. So that's when we start to move on to the best practices within G Suite. A lot of features are available to you within G Suite, but many of them are not shared or known about by admins. So I just want to make sure that they're really spoken about today. You're aware of what's available. And of course, know that Suitebriar is here to help you leverage them and really take advantage of all of the different security features that are available to you. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a security audit. So a security audit is a really great process that, first of all, we offer, Suitebriar offers, and also that we recommend that all organizations go through. We really recommend that you do this once a year and go over your current state of settings and understand, if your IT team has a proper incident response plan and if you're really taking advantage of all the settings we're going to discuss. And then, of course, after that, we'll have a short time for questions and anything else you may want to ask about. So let's get started. We're going to move on to field insights. And so as I mentioned, we're going to talk about security breaches and those sort of things. So I'll get started here. So here's a list of some of the most recent breaches, mainly in 2017 that occurred. And what I want you to take away from this slide is, as you can see, these are from some very large organizations. These are some heavy hitters here. People like OneLogin, they pride themselves with being secure and logging and handling logins from many different organizations. But unfortunately, even they were affected by breaches. And then, of course, if we move on to Equifax, that is one that's very well known. Over 143 million customers were affected by it. And because of the type of data that was stolen, including social security numbers, driver's license numbers, it's really considered one of the most, the worst breaches that ever occurred. So you can see from this timeline here that even though these are some large organizations with strong IT teams, they're not always taking advantage of the security features that are available to them. And that's really the point of today's webinar. Again, I'm going to talk about some things that you can take away from today and action right away to really secure your environment. So we're going to move on to phishing metrics. The main takeaway here is to understand that some phishing web pages are really straightforward. You can pretty much tell they're scammy, and those usually trick people 3% of the time, so pretty low. But what's scary here is that the believable ones, the ones that are really well made, can actually trick users 45% of the time. So that's a really scary metric to think about. That the fact that if it's really well done, 45% of the time it's going to trick users, and they may oftentimes enter their password into these sites. Another metric to keep in mind here is that 20% of the accounts that are taken, or passwords that are given away, they're accessed within the first 30 minutes. So what can you learn from that? You can learn that preventative measures are really going to be much more important here. And it's not always a good idea to have reactive measures where you're locking accounts, because 30 minutes is a really short time frame for you to, first of all, become aware that there's been a phishing attack and then taking the appropriate action to lock out accounts. Another thing is just locking out accounts and changing passwords may fix the issue for the time being, but it really doesn't target the security breach itself. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again. So some of the things we're going to discuss today are going to show you how you can really be preventative and educate your users on how to protect themselves from these sort of attacks. So what did we learn from those two pages? We talked about big breaches that occurred. We looked at the fact that 45% of the time, if it's a really well-made phishing attack, it's going to actually affect your users. So it's a really scary thing to think about. And what we can learn from that is passwords are no longer enough, right? just having a secure password, it doesn't really help all the time because, for one thing, passwords are often shared across other applications. So even if you're properly secure in G Suite, 75% of users are actually sharing that password with other applications. So they may use that for their YouTube, or they may use that for their Facebook or other applications outside of the main G Suite applications. And so no matter what you do, that password is always at risk. So additional verification methods must be implemented, mainly two-factor verification. So we're going to probably talk about two-factor quite a bit here, and it's really a good takeaway for this webinar. We strongly recommend that you implement it. It's available to all of the different G Suite SKUs, so it's not something you need to upgrade for. Anyone on G Suite can implement two-factor, and it's one of the best ways to protect yourself from phishing attacks. So the reason, what we see with basically with two-factor is that it's not being deployed enough, and we're going to talk about some of the reasons why we think that's possible, or why we think that organizations are not adopting it as well. But another thing here is that frequent password change policies, aren't going to be the only thing is not going to be a way to really lock you out, or really protect yourself, right? Because users are still going to select weak passwords, and you need to make sure that you have a proper security plan in place for changing passwords, and understand that, again, as I mentioned previously, just having secure passwords is not going to be the only step you need to take. The last thing here on the bottom is really important to understand, that your password recovery policy can also be your weakest link, right? So if it's really easy for anyone to just call in and change your password, it's going to be obviously a really open window for social engineering, where people can call in and change passwords without proper verification. So ensuring that there's a really strong password recovery policy in place is going to be very important. And that's something that we can also help you with when we do our security audit. All right, so moving on to security best practices, we're going to talk about some of the features that are available to you within G Suite. And again, we're going to the goal here is to really take away some action items that you can use right away, and take advantage of some of the G Suite security features that are built in. So we're going to talk about some things that are available to all of the G Suite versions, some of them that are only available in business and enterprise, and of course, enterprise only features. So I'll be very clear as to which ones are only with enterprise, etc. But there's definitely a lot of material here that you can take away, even if you're on the basic SKU. So again, I mentioned that we're going to touch on two-factor authentication a lot, and this is really a key example of what you need to do to really protect yourself from phishing attacks. A great example here is that the FBI themselves were recently attacked and hit by phishing, and accounts were breached. And the fact is that they didn't have a proper two-factor security in place. And that was one of the main reasons why accounts were able to be accessed. So even the FBI themselves needs to look at implementing a stronger two-step verification policy. Although I assume after that breach, they probably did that. So we can't stress the importance of implementing two-step verification. As I mentioned previously, Google has noticed that the adoption of two-step verification is surprisingly lower than they've expected. And some of these bullet points here sort of outline what they're thinking as to reasons. So friction in enrollment, there is a possibility if you enforce two-step verification, you may lock out users. So they've tried to set up settings like being able to set an expiry date, or even have your admin still allow access to specific accounts. If two-step verification is enforced, they can still call their administrator to get in. And I think another reason that there's been some friction with enrollment is the fact that it does require a mobile device. It requires user training. And of course, if you do look at doing security keys, there's a cost factor involved. But just as this slide mentioned, if you think about the cost of being hacked versus the price of implementing things like security keys, it's much larger, obviously, if you get hacked. So it's better to take these preventative measures right away. And then, of course, work with training your users and possibly implementing security keys. The reason why is because, for one thing, on the user training side, is security keys make it a lot easier for them to log in. They don't have to have that second piece, that one-time password sent to them. It's just a matter of clicking on a button and logging into their account. So if I move on to the next slide, you can see that universal security keys is really a strong way of protecting yourself. It's just another added piece of security that you can place on top of two-step verification. So these are just security keys that you plug into the device. They can also be connected to mobile devices through Bluetooth. And then you can click on a button instead of having to receive a one-time password. And it obviously uses cryptographic assertions, which allows you to stop man-in-the-middle attacks. So that one-time password, it's very strong, of course, as a piece of security, but there's always a possibility of a man-in-the-middle attack for that one-time password. If you really want to be secure and lock yourself down properly, getting security keys is a great way to do that. As I mentioned previously, it's effortless. It makes it a lot easier for your users to log in. They just have to click a button as opposed to wait for a text message or use the Google Authenticator app. And it's also part of the U2F open standard. So Google uses these globally across the organization with over 50,000 users. And they've recently reported that they've never had a breach with any account associated to a security key. So if I move on here, this is another feature. And of course, as I mentioned previously, two-factor verification, security keys, those pieces are available to any of the SKUs, right? So you don't have to be on business or enterprise to take advantage of those. You can go ahead and roll those out. Again, with two-step verification, no cost really involved, just a matter of training your users and getting them enrolled and then turning on enforcement. Here's another feature, security checkup, that is a free feature automatically built into your G Suite account. And in fact, we've seen that many organizations don't even know that this exists, right? So this is just built into your G Suite account. It's available when you click on the bottom right-hand corner, the top right-hand corner of your account, and you click on your little image, you go to Google Account, there's a security checkup. So what it does is it walks you through a series of questions and makes sure that your account is properly secured. It looks at things like mobile devices. Which devices are actually able to access your account? Maybe you've lost a phone and forgotten to sort of remove that synchronization to it, or maybe you just have an old phone that's still set up to access your data. That's one risk if anyone ever finds that phone, or just it's an open window. So going through the security checkup will show you these devices, and you can actually click on them and lock them out. It even shows machines as well, Mac devices, PC devices. It shows you which devices are being used to access your account. And you can go there periodically just to make sure that there haven't been any weird logins or weird devices that are accessing your account. It's also where you set up your two-step verification code, and it's a great place to send out through communications and really have your users manage their security themselves. Once they know that this section is available to them, it should be sort of a habit to check on this maybe once a month, once every couple of months. Just go in there, verify that all the security settings are properly set up and that they're aware of any device activity that's occurring in their account. So again, another place where you can deploy this feature to any of the G Suite SKUs, right? So business, basic, enterprise. This tool can be installed or even deployed to Chrome from an administrative perspective. You can have users download it directly, or you can deploy it to your Chrome devices. And it actually helps in two different ways. So it will actually protect you against phishing attacks. Once the extension is installed in Chrome, if the user enters their G Suite password in another site outside of the regular G Suite URLs, they'll be prompted with an alert, and you can even choose to have administrators get a notification that says, this account might be at risk because their password was entered elsewhere. So it protects them from phishing attacks, but it also protects them from password reuse. As I mentioned previously on a couple of slides ago, 75% of passwords are reused by users, right? So they're using the same password amongst other applications. And having this extension installed will actually discourage that from happening, because the minute they enter that password into a different, like Facebook or a different website, they'll get this prompt and possibly be locked out of their account by their administrator if they choose to do so when they get that alert. So this is another great tool available to all SKUs, and we strongly recommend evaluating it to see if it'll fit your business. Here's another, not really well-known area, and of course we can send you this information so you have access to it, but there's a phishing questionnaire that Google has created, and it's very robust. It gives some really great examples of real actual phishing emails that have been previously sent out and have worked, and it sort of quizzes the user on if they think it's phishing or not. So it's a great way to train your users. That's going to be one of the main places to secure yourself is educating your users on what phishing is and helping them to understand how to evaluate an email and understand if it's possibly malicious or fake. So this quiz is again just a series of emails that will appear on the screen, and the user is prompted to choose whether or not they believe the message is phishing or if they believe it's legitimate. So it'll be a mix of legitimate and phishing emails that will be placed on the quiz, and at the end they'll get a score. At the end of each question, even if they answer wrong, it will stop and show them what they should have looked at to understand if the message was real or fake. So it looks at things like the email headers. It'll show you, this domain is actually not the right domain, and other things that are built into common phishing attacks, so they can sort of learn as they go. The quiz itself is often updated with new attacks and new types of phishing, so it's something that you can periodically send out through communications and have your team go through as a quiz and get a high score. It's pretty an exciting way to sort of get them excited about learning about phishing and see who gets the highest score. So moving on, Cloud Identity Premium is a part of Enterprise, but it can also be purchased as a standalone feature if you're on the other SKUs such as Basic or Business. When you really want to start to think about managing security and understanding how to really, take it one sort of single pane view of logins, being able to report on activity within the domain, this is a great place to start, right? So Cloud Identity Premium allows you to use your Google credentials as the main source of truth to log into multiple applications. As you can see, it supports SAML 2.0, OpenID, OAuth, and it even supports secure LDAP, which is the ability to have your Google credentials used to log into LDAP applications. And then, of course, there's a custom developer section where you can create your own connectors. So mainly what this means is you can have Google be your SSO, your main single sign-on for other applications. So you can tie in things like Slack, Box, even SAP, and the user only needs to log in once to their G Suite account, and then from there they can access any application that supports SAML 2.0, OpenID, or OAuth. So they won't have to log in a second time with a different password. They just log in with their main G Suite credentials. Now, from an administrative perspective, this gives the admin a lot of power, especially if you do things like turn on two-step verification. Well, that means you're protected by two-step verification for your G Suite, but also any other applications that are plugged in to Cloud Identity. So if you're using security keys, that's another great feature that you're taking advantage of. And even if these other applications don't support things like security keys, well, they don't need to. Google is going to be your source of truth. They're only logging into their G Suite once to access these other applications. So it really secures down. And of course, you get all the great features such as reporting within G Suite. Another thing is that Cloud Identity is completely built into the G Suite admin control panel. So there's no new tools to learn. It's all built into the main G Suite control panel. So all the reporting, all the audits, all the alerts that you can turn on for your regular G Suite process will also take effect for all these other applications. So something to think about. Another feature of G Suite Enterprise is DLP, or data loss prevention. So this is a way to insert rules based on personal identifiable information such as credit cards, social security numbers, and other custom rules on top of your email and Drive content. So what this does is once the rules are in place, again, this is preventative. We always try to be preventative as opposed to reactive. Once these rules are in place, any user who tries to send out credit card information or social security numbers will be automatically prompted with a warning, or actually you can choose what happens. You can actually automatically block it, so the email will automatically be blocked, and then the user will get a notification, and even the admin can get a notification that somebody tried to send out this information. And it's the same thing for Drive. If somebody tries to share a document with some of these information inside, like credit cards, social security numbers, the administrator can actually choose the action to take. Do they want to block the sharing right away? Do they want to notify the user that they're trying to do this? what exactly actions do they want to take automatically. So again, a preventative measure to stop any of this information going outside your organization. So data loss prevention is a really great tool to be preventative. Of course, as mentioned here, you can also set up your own custom detectors using regular expressions, and you have full control over what you're allowing to be shared outside of your organization. So again, another enterprise feature that's fully built into the control panel, as you can see here, is the security dashboard. So this is a great way for admins to have a one place to go to and get a full view of all the activity within the domain. So you can have custom settings. You can look at how many messages are being sent through transport layer security, TLS. You can look at what the spam filter looks like. So oftentimes when there's a spam attack or a phishing attack, you'll see a spike in the activity from this dashboard. You'll see like a spike on the chart, and you'll see, okay, why normally I receive 10 spam messages per day, or even less than that typically. But on a specific day where you're being attacked, you might see that that goes up to 100 or even 1,000 messages that are being triggered, and that will give you an idea that it's time to take some action. So you can actually dive deeper on where these metrics are being taken from by clicking on View Report. So when you click on View Report, it'll actually plug you into the backend data and give you further details about the activity. Another piece within the security dashboard that a lot of customers are using is OAuth. So being able to see if you have any other applications or common ones that your users are using that are allowed to access your G Suite data. So for some add-ons and other features that are built into G Suite, third-party applications, I should say, not really built into G Suite, but there are add-on sections where you can add other applications that can read your data. This is a good way to track them. You can go into this OAuth section, get a nice chart, and see which applications are accessing your data, and then, of course, take action if you want to start to revoke access. Moving on, another enterprise feature is the security health check. So this is a great way to stay on top of Google's best practices, right? So understanding that it's important for to be on top of every single setting within G Suite and understand what Google recommends, and if you're taking advantage of it. The security health check does exactly that. It goes through each of the settings, and it shows if you're, first of all, you'll get a green check mark if you're exactly in order of the same best practice, but you might get a white star that will indicate that there's some changes that you can make to really be up to the best practice of Google. So it's a great way for admins to check up on themselves, check up on the settings, and go through. When you actually click on the star, it'll give you the actions to take to really lock yourself down and be more secure and be aligned with the best practices of Google. Another feature is the investigation tool. So the security investigation tool is another it is reactive, but it gives a lot of power back to the administrator. So I'll just give you an example for Gmail messages. In the event of a phishing attack, if anything gets through, on the other SKUs like G Suite Business or G Suite Basic, you might have to work with your employees or users to understand that, okay, there's been a phishing attack. Please do not open this message, or please mark it as phishing. So usually you need to either send out a communication or walk around the office and make sure that everyone's aware. But what's great is the security investigation tool will actually allow you to take action on those messages and mark them off as phishing directly from within this tool. So I could just do a search, find the phishing message, and then mark it as phishing, and it'll happen on everyone's inbox. Or I could even just automatically send it to the trash. So it's a great tool to implement in your incident response plan for your IT department to have access to in the case of a breach or a possible attack. So Chrome and Chrome OS, I'm sure many of you are familiar with these tools. Obviously, we're going to focus mainly on Chrome OS here. Chrome OS is a great tool to implement and sort of give Chromebooks to your users. They're very secure and protect you against malware and viruses. I've never heard of anyone being affected by a virus or malware on a Chrome device. It has automatic sandboxing. The file system itself is fully encrypted. And it does things like a verified boot. So every time you log in or boot the system up, it verifies the firmware, the kernel, and any system data to make sure that there hasn't been any tampering. And of course, from an admin perspective, you have full control over these devices. You can turn off the camera and disable that completely. You can ensure that the screen is locked the minute it's idle for a certain amount of time. And of course, it fully supports cloud identity and other SSO providers. So something to possibly think about deploying. All right, so we're going to move on. We're almost at the end already. Just to talk a little bit about a security audit. So Suitebriar strongly recommends doing a security audit yearly and really verifying your settings and understanding where you stand. And definitely it's always a part of the security audit is to review your incident response plan. So if your IT department doesn't already have an incident response plan where they have steps to take in the event of an attack, you don't really want them to be scrambling if this ever happens. So having a really strong incident response plan is definitely a really good part of the security audit. I'll move on. We break it out into 3 different areas. Optimize, which is where we look at your existing settings and we try to work with you to really implement the strongest settings we can. So for most, it's a matter of implementing 2-step verification, seeing how many super admins you have, maybe reducing the amount of super admins and reducing them to specific roles. Oftentimes, your admins don't need to have full access over the full domain. They may just need to be an admin of a specific application, maybe a Gmail admin or a group's admin, etc. Verifying any OAuth keys, as I mentioned before, that are currently set up to access your data, removing that access when not necessary, and then looking at other Gmail settings. When the prepare and monitor section is where we start to look at making sure that your admins have the tools available to them to get alerts and get notifications when things occur. And then respond is that incident response planning section where everyone in your IT department has access to the tools that they need to be able to respond to any attacks that may occur. So if I move on to the next slide, there's just 2 slides here where we just look at some of the things that are included with the Suitebriar security audit. So we'll look at what the best practice is for each of your settings. We'll look at your current setting, and then we'll give you actions to take. We'll obviously break this out into more of a timeline. We work with your IT department to plan out how we can move forward and get these things implemented. I think today, if you're going to take any of a takeaway, it would be to definitely look at implementing 2-step verification, looking at that Chrome extension, and definitely communicating that phishing quiz that I talked about previously. So on the next slide, again, this is some of the other settings that we would normally look at. And then I want to end soon so that we have a little bit of time for questions. But before I do, this is a link that you can all follow if you'd like to sign up for a Suitebriar security audit. We go really in depth into your system and look at all of the settings and then make recommendations on actions you should take to really secure yourselves. So I'm going to stop here and then break out for questions. Let's see. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. I'd be happy to unmute you, or you can always just ask the question in the question section of the webinar. So I'm just going to break here and let you guys ask any questions. If not, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully you will remember that Suitebriar is here to help you with a security audit. We strongly recommend you do one yearly, and we're definitely here to help you go through that process. Okay, not seeing